Good evening and welcome to Power of Our Story, produced and hosted by Sarah Carell. Tonight, I am your host, David Perez, and we're here to introduce Keith Knotek as our speaker and storyteller for the evening. Keith is retired Chair Sergeant and Police Commander with 30 years of law enforcement experience in California. He has written several books, including From Sorrow to Amazing Grace, One Cop's Journey, which was turned into a movie titled One Cop's Journey in 2022. Keith is a graduate of the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Development Association, otherwise known as LEDA, with their regional command college. The California Post Executive Course, the California Post Sherman Block Supervisory Institute, and holds a master's in organizational leadership and a bachelor's in criminal justice. Keith is an adjunct university instructor and lectures on topics related to mental health, resilience, and law enforcement. He's an advisory board member for the Violently Injured Police Officers Organization and enjoys volunteering, boating, and fishing. He lives currently in Prescott, Arizona, with his wife, Lily, and 2 adult daughters. Clearly, Keith is an underachiever, and we look forward to hearing from him and his story this evening. Thank you, Keith, and take it away.
Hey, thanks, David. Hey, everyone. Aloha from Arizona. It's good to be here with you. And I thank you for the opportunity to share. When I was going through my post-traumatic stress journey in trying to figure out how to get well, I thought that I was the only one. I thought that I was going it alone. In my warped, traumatized brain, I thought nobody knows what I've been through, woe is me and all of that. And about a little over 3 years ago, I realized I'm not the only one. And I started meeting and linking up with these amazing people that had similar experiences as me. And I thought that I had it bad. And then I talked to some of these other folks and it's like, man, I'd rather have my problems than your problems, But truly, I'm blessed. I'm grateful to be with you, and I'm grateful to be anywhere at this point, because I think at one point I probably wouldn't have been with you or, on this rock anymore. So for that, I'm blessed. I guess I'll start off with the, once when I was 5, I wanted a pony story. No. I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County. And man, I had this fascination with law enforcement for watching all the old cop TV shows. Adam 12, that was my go-to show as a kid. I wanted to be Jim or Pete. And there's an old show. When I look at it now, I'm like, man, I can't believe I used to watch these things. But there's this old show called The Rookies. I used to watch that faithfully. It was so phony, but I didn't know any better. I was just a kid, But I watched all these shows and I thought, man, this is what I want to do. My dad was a Lutheran pastor, so that's the environment I grew up in. He was a Lutheran pastor. My mom was a licensed vocational nurse. So it was kind of like growing up with Ozzie and Harriet. I lived a sheltered life. I didn't have a lot of life experience. Everything I thought I knew, I learned on TV. But my dad seemed to think that I was going to follow in his footsteps as a minister. And I think I was 15 years old when I broke the news to him and said, nah, I want to go into law enforcement. That's, I feel called to do it, and I'm going to do it. So I joined the Explorer program in the city I lived in, Huntington Beach. Went on ride-alongs and, learned a bunch of different things about law enforcement and the police department. And then when I graduated high school, the department hired me into a paid position as a police cadet. And I worked at the front desk, the city jail, the traffic bureau, going to crash scenes and doing traffic control and stuff like that. And at the ripe old age of 20 and a half, I went through the hiring process to be a police officer, an entry-level police officer. Amazingly enough, they hired me. And I was one of the youngest people in the history of that department to be hired, because Huntington Beach typically in the mid 80s had a reputation for hiring guys from like really seasoned guys from Los Angeles County agencies, different police departments in LA County, knuckle draggers. And then here's this, I'm not a big guy, but a 5'9" kid, 21 and a, or 20 and a half. And they hired me. So I went through the academy, graduated, hit the streets with my field training officer, and, we're off to the races. I worked for several different agencies in California, worked a bunch of different assignments. I think it was, I can't remember. I wrote about it. I have the old newspaper article. I can't remember now. That's what happens when you get older. If it was 88 or 89, but I got shot at for the first time on duty, and that was an eye opener. And it was kind of a nothing deal. Nobody was hit. I just cleared a traffic stop on a major state highway, and another unit pulled in behind my car, and that officer got out, and we were talking on the side of the road. I cut my violator loose, and he drove away. And then someone in a vehicle drove by our traffic stop scene really fast and cranked off a few rounds off at us. Nobody was hit, nobody was hurt, but it was, definitely an attention getter. So, with some of you, I know I'm preaching to the choir. If you spent, any time, and not necessarily 30 years, but even, a few years, 5 years, whatever, you're going to be exposed to things that shock the conscience. The average person wouldn't be able to do that. That's why they don't do the job, because they don't have the stomach for it, nor do they want to. So I began to experience a lot of death, a lot of horrific car crashes, multiple fatalities and that type of thing. And my little sheltered kid, naive brain, by about the time I was 30, got a pretty rude awakening into how things work in the real world. As I said, I did a bunch of different assignments, patrol, predominantly in patrol. And then eventually I promoted to sergeant, and went from a special assignment back to patrol. And in 97, and I had been newly promoted, like 6 months into being a watch commander. And so I'm still trying to learn how to do my new job. And May 21st of 97, I'll never forget it. Went to a domestic violence call, and the initial information through dispatch was there was a firearm involved. And then when we got to the house, it's like, there were a bunch of kids running around, and mom and dad, who were fighting with each other, they're nowhere to be found. They're in the wind. They're walking through the neighborhood somewhere. So I get a description, put it out over the radio. One of the kids said that his dad did not have a firearm. And I put the description out over the air, left a deputy at the house to get information from the kids. And I decided to go drive through the neighborhood to look for these two people. Well, shortly after that, I hear over the radio, one of my other deputies spotted the male, the husband, behind a church at 10th and Grand. And I was driving right up to the intersection at that time. So I pulled into this church parking lot, and the guy foot bailed and started running through a field. and Randy Jennings, that was my friend, my deputy. Randy was running in front of me, and it was pitch black. It was 10 o'clock at night. There were no street lights around. We only had the illumination of our spotlights and our headlights. So we go out into the darkness, and it was really hard to see the back of the suspect. And the next thing I saw was muzzle flash, just multiple muzzle flashes. And of course, the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. Then I could hear the concussion, I can hear the gunfire. And then I saw my friend go down, my friend who was running in front of me. And then I heard rounds going past my head. So turns out what had happened was there was an olive tree in the middle of this field, and he took a position by the olive tree, got down on one knee and made himself small so we couldn't see him very well. And that's when he opened up on us. And anyway, the long story short was my friend was hit 5 times. The front panel of his vest took most of the rounds. He took one through the wrist of his gun hand, which blew his wristwatch off. But sadly, Randy Jennings was killed. The fatal round penetrated just above the Kevlar, right here below his neckline. So that was a big, reality check for me. I didn't know how to react to that. Oh, by the way, the bad guy's no longer with us either. So I was the only one who walked out of that field alive. So for those who don't think survivor's guilt's a real thing, trust me, it's very, very real. I somehow felt not responsible for Randy getting killed. For that, I had no control of, but I felt protective of him because I'm this brand new, supervisor, and he was one of my people. I'm supposed to take care of my people and get them the resources to do their job. And, whether that feeling is right or wrong or indifferent, that's how I felt at the time. And extreme grief, sorrow. I was off work for 2 weeks and didn't know how to process it. Some of my other deputies came over to my house like the next day with a bottle of booze. So that's how I coped with it. And we drank, we cried. I tried to fall asleep finally after being awake for over 24 hours. And then as soon as I started drifting off to sleep, I'd hear gunfire in my sleep and muzzle flash, and I'd wake up in a sweat. So that went on for a while. But in the mid 80s, the mentality and the culture and the profession, see, some of the guys that trained me, let me go back to the mid 80s. One of my primary FTOs was he was a Green Beret. He was Army Special Forces, and his way of coping was, have a couple belts of whiskey, suck it up, come back to work the next day. You'll be fine, kid. And so that's how I was brought up in the profession. So that's what I did. I went to the department psychologist. I got cleared to go back to work. I told him everything he wanted to hear, for fear of saying, no, I'm not all right. I'm not, I'm not processing this, and I was back in the saddle like a week and a half later. And ironically, when I got in my car and went out into the field, my first day back to work, the very first call that my people were getting was a suicidal subject with a sawed-off shotgun standing in his front yard. And so straight out the gate, I'm rolling code to that. And fortunately, we didn't have to deal with him. He finished the job before we got there. But it was another one of those reality checks for me. So fast forward, I went through a divorce. I had 2 young daughters at the time. I was with Butte County Sheriff's Department when all of this happened. So I lateraled back to an agency in Southern California because my ex-wife got her old job back with the Sheriff's Department in Southern California. And I felt I needed to be closer to my daughters, so I could be a dad. I prioritized that over my career. I've lost friends in the line of duty. That's been pretty tough. 2001, I was involved in another shooting on a traffic stop. And it was night. I was a patrol sergeant. By now, I'm working for San Jacinto PD. It's a city of about 50,000 people in Riverside County, California. And I was a swing shift sergeant, and I made a late night traffic stop and had all the high beam spotlights takedowns on. When I'm walking up to the car, I had my flashlight in my weak hand, and my flashlight beam caught the glistening of something coming out the window. And basically the driver did one of these as I was walking up, and he had a pistol in his hand. And I didn't stick around to see what happened next. My flashlight caught, the barrel coming out of the window, and I booked it between the rear of his vehicle and the front of my vehicle. And I just started, unleashing copper and lead through his back window. He put the car in drive and took off. And by the time I ran around to the back of my car and got in to, go in pursuit of him, all I saw was tail lights way, way, way in the distance. So he was in the wind. We got him a couple days later. He was California calls it a parolee at large. He was a prohibited possessor of firearms. He was a convicted felon. He was released from prison on parole. He violated his parole, and now he's armed in a stolen vehicle. I didn't know it was a stolen vehicle because it was cold plated. It had a valid license plate that he took off from another vehicle. So when I called it in, it just came back. It didn't come back stolen. So there was that. That got my attention. And then by 2004, I was going through my second divorce. And that was a little stressful. And 2008, I was involved in my third shooting. That was on an Indian reservation in Riverside County. See, we don't have tribal police in California. Post does not recognize, California Post doesn't recognize tribal police as state peace officers. So if there are any like tribal police in California, they get like a special, a SLEC, Special Law Enforcement Commission through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So anyway, this Indian reservation, they didn't even have that. They just had tribal security. And the call was shots fired at the guard shack going onto this Indian reservation. So the local law enforcement agency, wherever the res is, has to do all the policing for the reservation. So we went, and sure enough, a couple of yahoos blew by the guard shack going into the Indian reservation, and the passenger leaned out the window and opened fire on the guard shack. Fortunately, none of the security guys were hit. So we're like, okay, it's a legit call. Send more units. So we go rolling in looking for the vehicle. We got a direction of travel, and we knew we started getting closer because of the round that hit one of my deputy's cars. And we started taking indiscriminate fire and some directed targeted fire from like a knoll area. So what they did, it was, believe it or not, it was a male and a female. They were both armed. The male was armed with an AK-47, fully automatic, and the female had an SKS. and they thought it would be a good idea to engage us. So they abandoned their vehicle, went on this knoll thing, and they were in a position of advantage. They had high ground on us, and they were shooting down on us. So we had to position our cars in such a way that, we're going to use them for cover and concealment. So that was a little frightening. We were pinned down for over an hour. Fortunately, my previous department is the third largest sheriff's department in California. So we had a lot of resources. So SWAT was rolling in with a couple of Bearcats, which are armored vehicles. And then we had our airships overhead. We had two of them orbiting around the shooters, and they decided it would be a good idea to shoot at our air units. And our SWAT sniper in one of the air units didn't think it was such a good idea, and he got the green light to actually, and this is unprecedented, totally unprecedented. This has never happened in my county before. Both suspects were eliminated from the air. They were taken out by a SWAT sniper in one of our helicopters. And fortunately, like one of my guys got abrasions and stuff from glass flying everywhere from some rounds hitting his windshield. Thank God none of us were hit. So 5 days after that incident, I went through the debriefing and all that good stuff. Thought, wow, I could have died again. And then 5 days after that, I went and got married to my now wife. So that's the world of law enforcement. That's what we live in. Life doesn't stop. You don't stop getting married because you have a dangerous, stressful, traumatic job. But my way of coping was drinking. I started drinking more and more and more until it became out of control. So on my days off, I was drinking. After shift, I would drink because initially it was to get to sleep because I wasn't sleeping. We all know how important sleep is for mental health and resilience. So when the wine stopped working, I switched to the hard stuff. My drinking got worse. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010, and then my mom died that year also. And then some other things happened on the job. There was a horrible stabbing that I actually rolled up on it, that's a different story. But that's when my drinking really started going south, was 2010. And so I switched to the hard stuff because the wine wasn't working anymore. And about a year before I retired January 2015. I got 30 in. The magic age is 50 in California. You have to, the old retirement system for police and fire was you had to be a minimum age of 50 to collect your full pension. So I stuck it out until my 50th birthday and bailed. I'm like, 30 years, I'm good. The new guys, they have to work until they're 57 and a half before they can collect their full pension under the new retirement system. So I tried to get sober and managed to stay sober a year before I retired. I just white knuckled it. I wasn't going to AA. I didn't have a sponsor. I just, I was like still going batty and out of my mind. But I transferred into a cushy assignment my last 2 years on the job, which was kind of nice because I was able to work all the holidays and bump up my final retirement pay. So I stayed sober, and then of course life goes on even after retirement. My dad died. 6 months after my dad died, my father-in-law died. Then my best friend and mentor on my first department died of colon cancer at the age of 59. And then, what else? Oh, and then one of my deputies, Zach, his wife, was a police officer for Palm Springs PD. And in 2016, I had been less than a year into retirement. Then in 2016, his wife, I mean, they were a young family. They are only late 20s, early 30s. They just had their first child, and she returned to work to Palm Springs PD after being on maternity leave. And within a week and a half of returning to work, Leslie was shot and killed through a doorway on a domestic violence call. She and Gil Torres, who was with the department for darn near 30 years, and he was getting close to retirement. They were both killed by a guy with a 5.56, an AR. And so that took a toll on me, because I knew Zach. He was one of my guys, and then the drinking started again. And then I lost another good friend in April of 2019. And then in May 2019, it all came to a head. I self-imploded, and didn't care so much about living, but I didn't really want to die either, because I have a wife and 2 adult daughters who live in 2 different states. And thought, well, I don't care, but they're going to be awfully sad if I'm not around. So I hung on, drank, crashed my car, got locked up for DUI, and then thus the transformation began. It's like, man, something's got to change, and I'm like, I don't know what I need to do, but I need to do something. So I prayed. I started reading up on mental health and resiliency. I was not very self-aware. I really wasn't. My wife could see like a post-traumatic stress moment coming on before I even knew it was coming. She could see it, because I'd be sitting on the couch next to her watching TV or something, and she'd be like, "What's going on?" Nothing. That was my response for everything. "How are you?" "Fine." "Everything's fine." "What's going on?" "Nothing." She's like, "You're here, but you're not here." And I decided to who was the one that said he went to, was it Utah? EMDR. Yeah. So I got into therapy. I went through a bunch of sessions of EMDR. I did that. And I started feeling better. And, God, I got reacquainted with my faith again, reaffirmed my belief in God. Because I should be dead. There's time and time again. I mean, what I didn't tell you was I was run over by a truck when I was in the 5th grade. It literally ran over my chest and there wasn't a mark on me. Tell me that's not a miracle. So it's like every time I doubted God, I'm like, okay, you're still here. It's a miracle, right? So I learned about the 4 pillars of resilience, mental, physical, spiritual, social. And we forget about the spiritual component a lot of the time. A lot of people do. So I took a holistic approach. It's like, all right, I got to stop drinking. I got to get into AA. I need a sponsor. So abstinence from alcohol, working on this, working on my mental health. And I wrote a book in 2020, and that was released. Basically, it's a faith-based autobiography on my life before, during, and after law enforcement. So it's this one here, From Sorrow to Amazing Grace, but that's obsolete. I just released the 2nd edition last month because I learned more in these past couple of years. So the new one has additional content. I talk about the 4 pillars of resilience. I became a certified public safety chaplain. I got trained in neuro-linguistic programming. I went through the Air Forces through the back door, Civil Air Patrol. I went through the chaplain course, critical incident stress management course, and completed that. And then everything I do now is geared towards helping veterans. Oh, and I'm a veteran too. I was a traditional guardsman in the California National Guard. So I did that concurrently while I was a full-time peace officer. So, my mission is to help veterans, first responders, and anyone who's suffering in silence. That's what I do today. I rewrote a course up at Northern Arizona University called Psychological Survival for Law Enforcement. It used to be a 2-hour program, and I got it certified through FLETC, the new curriculum, through the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, because the program I teach in up at the university, I teach other things too, but that's the one I'm most passionate about. They regulate the curriculum for that whole program. So I do that. And then I know that Ryan and even Terry, you may have heard of Mario Oliveira. Funny thing, how much time do I have? Okay, we're good, I guess. Last year, almost a year to the day, I get this instant messenger message from Mario Oliveira. He says, "Hey, you don't know me, but we have a mutual friend." And it turns out we do have a mutual friend. It's a girl, a lady that I used to work with in Southern California. She was a police officer, and she was injured on duty in a pursuit-related traffic collision, and she had to medically retire from that. Well, her whole family's from Massachusetts, so she moved back to Mass. So she and Mario became friends because they're both on the Concerns of Police Survivor board in Massachusetts. And she says, "Hey, I know a guy who wrote a book," because Mario was looking for someone to write his story. Although I didn't know that at the time when he reached out to me. I thought he wanted to write his story. And just because I wrote a book, he was like looking for advice or pointers or whatever. So he told me his amazing story, and it's truly amazing for those of you who don't know it. Mario Oliveira was a Somerville police officer and detective, and he was subsequently assigned to an ATF task force trying to get these illegally trafficked firearms with no serial numbers off the streets, because they were being illegally trafficked into Mass and put into the hands of notorious gang members, and they are committing homicides and stuff with them. So he was a task force officer. Long story short, there's this fugitive that they're looking for. He has a felony warrant for trafficking and some other stuff. Lo and behold, they stumble upon him one night. There's a struggle. The suspect's armed. Mario gets shot 6 times, 5 to the center of Mass, and then once through the wrist of his gun hand, ironically. Mario died. He got transported to Mass General in Boston, and he died 3 times. He was literally dead. The trauma center surgeon, David King, who operated on him, he's a full bird colonel in the Army Reserves. He's assigned to special operations. So because of his non-disclosure agreement, I can't say what unit he's with, but you could probably figure it out. He's done these battlefield surgeries where he's opened up someone's diaphragm and manually massaged their heart back to life. That's what he did with Mario 3 times. And Mario was so shot up, his colon was all messed up. He just started putting clips and everything. And when Mario came out of it, when he came out of surgery and went into recovery, Mario remembered everything that happened. And the doctor said, "How could you remember everything? You were dead. You were clinically dead. You had no heartbeat, you had no pulse, and your blood pressure crashed." And Mario remembered the gurney ride from the emergency room up to the operating room. He remembered everything. And he saw everybody in the room. But it's very much a spiritual story, because there was this nurse that was in the room with him that wasn't really there. And then he found out who the nurse was later. I don't want to spoil it. And then Dr. King, who's right, he's a man of science, right? Physiology, biology. It's not that he didn't believe Mario. He's like, well, yeah, you're telling me everything that happened. So obviously I believe you. What you're telling me is true. He says, I can't wrap my head around it. I can't wrap my head around the science. And I'm telling you, folks, you can't make this stuff up. The doctor went in for a procedure 10 years later, just like less than 2 years ago. He died, but he's still with us today. It was like, he said he had this experience where it was like, it wasn't like come towards the light. And I'll just tell you, like the way Dave is a down-to-earth guy. He's so incredibly intelligent, but he's like, yeah, just call me Dave. He says, it was like God was shaking the shit out of me saying, listen, dummy. He's like, I'm going to send you back to do it all over again. You're going to do it right this time. And he was like, whoa. And, you know, so he had this experience as well. And, you know, I watched a video, Mario sent it to me. So anyway, I wrote this thing. It's Mario's story. It's called Gun Runner. And it was just released 2 weeks ago. And unbelievably, it's a bestseller already. I'm amazed. It's really gotten good feedback, and it's really well received. But yeah, I think in society today, it's you know, we live in these uncertain, weird, convoluted times. It's an uplifting story, and I think that's, you know, people want to read that. You know, they want uplifting. They want to be distracted from the real world for a few hours, you know. So anyway, that's all I got for you.
That is absolutely incredible. And thank you, Keith, for sharing all of that. It's really special to hear from you. And thank you for your vulnerability, your openness, and your art of storytelling, not just in cover to cover, but in words as well. Generally speaking, we open up the floor to questions if you're good
Absolutely.
with that.
Absolutely.
And,
be happy to answer any questions.
Michelle is the first one with her hand up. It's like, you know, the Price is Right or whatever. When you hit the button, Michelle wins the prize.
All right, Michelle.
Yeah, it was fast on that one. So the first half of my career, I actually spent dispatching with California City Police Department.
Oh yeah. The second largest city in California in square miles.
Right, not in people.
That's right.
Yeah, so I remember the 2008 incident that you were talking about, because I was dispatching back then.
On the res?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
It was interesting to hear that. But one of the things that I did want to say that I appreciated you kind of just bringing to light that it was a struggle that you had is the layer that's added to when you're dealing with a traumatic event, the layer that a supervisor level brings to it. Because for my final incident or whatever, the big one was incident when I was working in the capacity as a supervisor. Mm-hmm. So I think it does bring on an extra layer of guilt or responsibility that we feel, whether it's rational or irrational. But I did appreciate you talking about that, because that is something that I also am still working through too.
Yeah, absolutely. The tough thing was after being involved in the shooting, then I had to coordinate the response to rescue Randy, to, you know, because the area behind the church, it was a field, and there was dry, dead vegetation, like star thistle, and it was like 3 feet high. So when people go down on the ground, you can't see them, you can't see their position. So I didn't know if the suspect was hit or not. So we had to approach it tactically. I had, you know, I was by myself for a little bit, and when I put out, you know, $11.99. Some people call it $9.99. Everybody rolls. I had to wait for a couple more folks to get there. And then we went into the field together tactically as a team to rescue him. So there was all these moving parts in addition to having just been involved in a shooting. And yeah, so it, like you said, it adds a whole other layer into the situation, as if it wasn't already stressful.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Did anybody else want to go next? I see Sarah.
I was going to try to go at the end, but I'll let other people think through and process. You know what, actually, can we let Todd and Chris go? I'd like to wait just because
Yeah, for
I
sure.
have the experience.
Yeah, for sure. Todd, go ahead, bud.
Well, thank you, Keith. Your story brought to mind a couple of things. First off, the whole 1980s version of critical incident stress management.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was 17 when I joined the fire department, and that was 1982. And about 3 weeks after I joined the department, we went out on a suicide call. And it was a kid that was, maybe a year younger than I did. And he asphyxiated himself in his shed with his motorcycle. And I encountered Mom on my way in. And that call, I even up to a couple of years ago, I had nightmares about that call. And I still clearly remember my lieutenant debriefing me by going in back to the fire station. And now I'm 17 years old and we get shit-faced.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my critical incident stress debriefing.
Yeah.
He said, look, you got to forget it. You got to suck it up because the next call's coming, and you can't keep that crap in your head. And the other part that rang true to me was the open chest heart massage. I was 22 and went out on a rollover accident, DUI. Guy rolled the car over, crushed his wife in it, and I somehow managed to end up in the operating room at Harborview Medical Center and watch this guy crack this woman's chest open and do open chest heart massage before he looked down and saw this guy in bunker gear that was masked up with gloves because I was bag masking her at the time. And that's something you never forget. But I think, it illustrates, I think even now there are agencies that ask their officers and their firefighters to deal with trauma in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't get into that business to be disconnected emotionally. We get into that business because we feel a certain way about people and we want to help them. And there's absolutely no way that you can disconnect yourself emotionally from some of the shit that you see.
No,
and that's why
you can't unsee that stuff.
No, absolutely not. And our station 4, we were just the most absolute gung-ho bunch, and we had a standard that any patient that we rolled up on was going to be alive when the medic showed up. Because back then you didn't have a medic unit, you didn't have paramedics at every station. We had 6 paramedic units cover the whole county. And God, that was an impossible standard to keep. And those are the ones that you still have nightmares about 30 years later.
Yeah.
The ones that, you forget all the ones you saved.
Yeah.
It's the ones that you lose that visit you in the middle of the night. I can hardly wait to read your book. Thank you so much for coming on here. It's been an amazing story to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd. We have a whole line of questions, which is awesome. I just want to inject one thing in there about the book. I'm also looking forward to reading your book, but I am dysfunctional and dyslexic and everything else. So until you put it on Audible, I'm out. So I would urge you and encourage you, as everybody else in this call who knows me, please, 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 please go to Audible.
It's
we'll
so
discuss that later.
simply written that even a cop can read it.
Eesh, I don't know, my friend.
Maybe even a firefighter. I don't know though.
Speaking of cops, we're going to go to Seattle's newest skipper, Chris Gregorio.
I'm about to be in a bad area. Can I go after somebody else, please? I don't want to get interrupted.
Absolutely. Brenda, you're up.
Oh, okay. So I'm the nurse in the group here. I've been a nurse 35 years. I work with suicide prevention, law enforcement, in the military. So 35 years, I came in late to your story, but you understand, like I do, that of course I have baggage in my head too that I deal with.
Absolutely.
And so I've had to learn how to process all of this and, become that person that has always had faith, but got that self-care, slow your ass down. Life is too short to be working 24/7. So when I popped in, you were going over all of the things that you're currently doing now. And I got tired listening to you. So my question is, what are you doing to slow down? I know you got your faith in order. You got the outside of working.
Yeah, well, I'm retired now. I get paid to stay home, which is nice. I actually, this latest book that I wrote, I was actually under contract to write it. I had a year to get it done before the contract expired. So I had to get it done. I procrastinated for a while. So it's like, okay, I'm going to put everything else aside. Let me knock this thing out. And then once that's off my plate, I can do other things. But one of the things, again, I'm passionate about, is I teach about resiliency. I was one of the co-founders of a sheepdog fellowship at my church. It's kind of like this tribe right here in front of me. It's a group of current and former first responders and military veterans. And our purpose is obviously fellowship, thus the name Sheepdog Fellowship, but also healing and spiritual growth. Those are a couple of our missions. And so that keeps me busy. I volunteer with Civil Air Patrol. I'm on the air crew. Everything I do now is stuff that I want to do because I can. The other thing I learned to do is to say no, because when people find out you're retired, they don't think you have a life and they try to, volunteer you to do all these different things. So I've gotten a lot better at telling people no, I just can't do it because I have a life, I have a wife and, my daughters are grown and out of the house. But yeah, I go fishing. We live in the high country of Arizona. So we have a bunch of lakes around here. Like Saturday, I'm going kayaking, so it sure beats working for a living.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm in that too. I just got off of a contract I signed for someone for 6 weeks and they're like, well, what are you going to do now? I'm like, I did my time.
I'm going to
This is about
Disneyland.
me. That's why I wanted to ask you, like, you named all these things. I could name all these things too, but like, what was the, slow thing, the fishing and all of that. So
oh yeah,
that's the nurse in me making sure still. So
yeah, and we have these hummingbird feeders in the backyard. I'll tell you what, Northern Arizona we didn't have all these different variety of birds in Southern California. If we did, the smog just, you couldn't see them because of all the smog. But we have all these different beautiful birds here, colorful birds, red, and we have, cardinals and red robins and bluebirds, hummingbirds. So sometimes just for kicks, we have hummingbird feeders up in the backyard. I'll sit in the backyard for 30 minutes and just chill and look at the trees and the birds.
That makes me happy. Thank
It's
you.
therapeutic.
Yep. Thank you.
You bet.
Awesome. Gilligan, are you in a better area or what's going on, buddy?
Yeah, man, good to go. Thank you very much. Brother, thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability. Thank you for joining this tribe. This has been life changing and saving for me holistically. One thing I'd like to ask you for people that are watching and will watch, I appreciate you sharing so vulnerably all of your experiences. But for the fixed parts, you said that you got to a really dark place where you're drinking a lot and things like that. And I think that a lot of times we very often get into that cycle to cover up the pain and the suffering and the things that we're dealing with, all the trauma. But I think that we often recognize that at times, but then we say, I need to do something about it. I need to fix it. Where did you find that courage? What was that? If you could share something that may flip a switch for somebody to let them know that that fight, that it's worth taking that step forward and having that discipline to follow through. What was it that worked for you? Because what worked for me might not work for everybody else. What was it that worked for Keith? Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the question. And it's a good one. When I was drinking, when I was still working and drinking, I realized that, hiding bottles in the garage, that's normal. People don't do that sort of thing. They just don't. So I knew there was a problem, but I told myself, you know what? I know it's not normal. I know it's not healthy. I know it's not good, but I'll just do this a little while longer just to get over that hump. And that's what I tell myself. Oh, there's always tomorrow. And like I said, about a year before I retired, I white knuckled it. I stopped drinking without any help from anybody. I didn't work a program or anything, but I didn't stay sober either because, life happens and, I reach for the old go-to, right? It's affordable, it's legal. You go to the store, you buy a bottle, social drinking is socially acceptable. So, I hid the fact, or tried to hide the fact just how much I was drinking. But what did it for me was that crash, that DUI crash, getting locked up. And I had a bizarre experience. I'll just tell you what happened. So I'm home from this whole ordeal, and my wife was none too pleased with me. So I was sleeping in one of the guest rooms, and I was awakened in the middle of the night, like 2 or 3 in the morning, by a figure standing next to my bed. Now, I wasn't frightened. I wasn't frightened at all. And you're all probably thinking, what kind of crack pipe has this guy been smoking? But there was a figure next to the bed, and it was like emitting like peace and comfort to me. And it wasn't saying anything verbally to me, but it was like conveying telepathically, I guess you could say, is everything's going to be okay, my son. You're going to be okay. Follow me. And I rolled over and I went back to sleep, and I got the best sleep of my entire life. And then I woke up in the morning, and my mind was just cluttered with all these thoughts that were coming at me. And basically what was coming to my mind was all of the things that I needed to change about me, my character defects. I mean, it was like I became acutely aware of all of my faults and defects and everything that I needed to change. And I didn't want to forget that moment. So I jumped on the computer and I banged out like 5 pages worth of stuff. And that eventually is what became my first book. But I haven't told a lot of people. I've told a few. Actually, I wrote about it in this latest book, Gun Runner, about the being, the presence that visited me in the middle of the night. Now, you know, I don't know if it was God, an agent of God. It wasn't bad because it was conveying peace and it didn't frighten me. And you know, I'm not like a ghost hunter or UFO wacko, but this really happened. So then I started thinking, was I dreaming that, or was I actually consciously awake for that? And every time I think about it, it's like, well, no, I rolled over and I looked to my right side and it was there. I'm like, I was consciously awake for that. So that was kind of like literally my come to Jesus moment. That's when I decided that I can't live like this anymore. Everything's got to change.
So for you, it was kind of a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
But would if I hear you correctly, are you saying that that spiritual thing led you to being more self-aware and more being self-honest that helped make that change? But it was through a spiritual channel?
Absolutely. Because I knew that in order to recover from both post-traumatic stress and alcoholism, that I needed to be transparent. I used to be this guy that held everything close to the vest. I put on a fake face and I went to work every day and acted like everything was fine. And, you know, a lot of people do that. But I realized I needed to get honest with myself. I needed to get honest with other people. And, you know, in order to help other people eventually, you can't give away something that you don't already have yourself. So I had to be real.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, my friend. And I'm sure that you're touching and helping so many with that honesty. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. That was a great exchange from both of you. Thank you. Brenda, you still had your hand up and I saw somebody else mention you. Did you have another question?
No, I didn't know my hand was up.
Sorry. All right. Janet, you're up next.
Okay, first I want to say, David, we can have story time and I'll read the book to you if you want.
Oh, that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic.
So anybody can join it. We can set up a reading, like a story time, and I can read it. I just ordered the book. Thank you, Keith, so much. One thing I think that we forget, and I'm so grateful that you're so on, you know, so open with all this. My dark period was car accident where I was physically and mentally injured, but not injured to the point that it was life-threatening. But what it did is made me sit on my butt and sit in my you know what. And there was the dark night that there was just this light that said, you need help. And I knew I needed help and sought that. One thing for anybody that's watching, there's such a theme in our conversations that our faith, and not a religion so much, but there's so much faith, and you hear it. They've taken, you know, religion or faith out of you know, schools and so many places. Yet when we come to a critical time, that's where our first places we go. And it's just something that people should be aware of, that there is that place, because it's so there. And there's something there that is there for us if we pay attention. And if we don't pay attention, it makes sure that we do. I had 4 car accidents in 10 years. The fourth one took me out for a year till I got it together and worked on things. So I want to thank you again for being so honest. I truly believe what happened to your friend. I understand all of that, and with your guest that night. And I am so looking forward to reading the book. And David, that's a promise.
Nice. We can do a slumber party from what I'm reading in the chat here. So it'd be
Yeah.
Dave,
fantastic.
can I add something really quick? Because as a person of faith and as a nurse and who has seen things happen that you wonder, I'm sorry, that was a miracle. I don't care what anyone says, that person being alive or this person being alive is a miracle. So
Mhm.
I have that faith, but I want to say that there was a time where I was angry with God and I was angry at things that had happened and things that I had seen happen and that were allowed to happen. So I think along with saying that, we have our faith or what spirituality, whatever it is you believe in to keep us going, I think we also need to say that it's okay to get angry at God because it happens to a lot of us. And then we just need to work through it. So part of what people go through at times, with the drinking or whatever vice it is we're using to cope is being angry, because I know I never thought I was angry until I learned, no, that was anger too with the grief, but it's okay to be angry at God sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, we when you're exposed to trauma all the time, it makes you wonder, if there really is a real loving God, then why does he allow this to happen to people? I know I'm not the only one who's thought that before. But yeah, I mean, there was a point in my life when I doubted my own faith. I saw so much crap that I just, I had no relationship with God. I was God. I did things according to me, not according to the way, to God's way, but it didn't work out. It didn't pan out so well doing things my way.
Yeah, I can completely concur with that. I feel my way didn't work either for a while until I met this group and one other individual specifically that changed the course of everything. And so interesting. Thank you for that. Paul, you are the next hand I see.
If you want to let Sarah go first, I'm fine with that.
I think Sarah wants to bring up the tail end of this thing, so we're going to let her go at the end.
You're up, Paul.
All right. Question for you, Keith. Without going into a lot of detail, I walked in on an armed robbery off duty without a weapon.
Oh, I heard this story 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Southern California, that's a big no-no, as you well know.
Yes.
And but for the grace of God, and I don't say that easily, but for the grace of God, I'm still sitting here tonight because there were 11 gang members in this little drive-in dairy taking everything they could get their hands around, money, food, Twinkies. I mean, it didn't matter. They were just grabbing everything. And 2 of them were armed. And of course, I went over there to get a quart of milk. And I lived right around the corner from the place. I knew the owner. And in fact, I knew the son-in-law and daughter of the people that owned the dairy, Altadena Dairy, were the godparents to my children.
I remember Altadena Dairies.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
if you spend any time out in Chino, you remember them for a different reason.
Yeah.
In any
The
event, my
smell.
question is this. When the guy turned around and he pointed his weapon, it was a 45, at my forehead about a foot away, I went into martial arts mode, whacked his arm, took his weapon, and when I took his weapon, he still had his finger on the trigger. And so off a round went, and I lost the hearing in my left ear and some of my balance as a result of that. And there's no room for deaf cops anywhere. But one of the things that happened to me, and I'm curious to know if it's happened to you, not just picking on you, but to know if it happened to other people in similar situations. I saw a video, a movie of my children growing up in very rapid succession. And I felt like, you know, this could be the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm getting a message here. And I just wondered if you experienced anything similar to that in the shootings that you were involved in.
You know, what I did think of, my daughters. They were like in 97, the first one, they were age 1 and 4. So they're very young.
Yeah.
I had just gone through my divorce. And I thought about them, and I knew that I had to focus on the threat and what was going on. But subconsciously at that time, I call them arrow prayers. It's like I sent up little arrow prayers to God, like, God, get us out of this alive, please, you know. And then I had to focus. But I remember thinking about my daughters. I need to ask God to keep me in the fight, and then I need to focus on the fight. So that's kind of what was running through my mind. And then on the traffic stop where the gun barrel was coming out the window, my main thought immediately was, and I think this is how it played in my mind, was something like, oh shit. And I booked it and unholstered as I was going between the vehicles. And then I'm like, I need to get rounds off, because if I actually let him get out of the car and he advances on me, then we might have even more of a problem. So my main thought was just getting unholstered, getting out of what the fatal funnel, getting out of the fatal funnel, getting unholstered, and getting led down range. So, yeah.
Paul, you asked if anybody else had seen that movie. The gun that was pointing at me was in my own hand. And you know, it was a Series 70 Combat Commander, about 4.5 pounds of trigger pull. And I don't know how many ounces of trigger pull I had left when I saw that movie. And I know for sure that the good Lord is showing me what was going to happen if I finished what I had started. And that was what kept me from using those last few ounces of trigger pull.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Until you've experienced it, describing it is meaningless. But when you have experienced it, and I kept it in for a long time, I didn't have that conversation with anybody, because back in those days, like Keith said, if you admitted that you needed help, they admitted you to the exit.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah, you're not fit for duty.
Yeah. And, you know, go get a job as a street sweeper or something, but, you know, you can't stay here. And the thing that occurred after that was I don't say this with any degree of pride at all, but I literally beat this guy within an inch of his life with his own weapon. And then I cleared it, and I hollered at the owner who was inside at the cash register, scared to death, just like the rest of us. And I said, call the police department, tell them that an officer needs help. We didn't have radios in those days, not portable. And I was off duty anyway, so I wouldn't have had that equipment in my car. But I said, call them and tell them an officer needs help. And so he did that, and officers from 3 different departments showed up. And the first guy that got there was the watch commander that day, and he was my boat partner. And so he looked at me, and I had blood all over my t-shirt, and he pulls out his radio and he says, "We got to get you an ambulance." I looked at him and I said, "Bill, it's not my blood." I pointed to the ground, and he said, "Oh." And just then I looked over, and here is a Volkswagen bus going by with the rest of these guys in it. And the Angel was orbiting. And I grabbed the radio and turned it to the air channel, and I said, "Who's the observer?" And the guy,
26 Angel.
yeah.
Did you work for an Orange County agency?
No, this was in LA, but it's the same, essentially the same thing. And so I asked who the observer was, and the guy came back and he told me, and he knew me and I knew him really well. We'd worked together previously before he went to the Airedales. And I said, "Put that bird down right on Huntington Drive, because there is a Volkswagen bus coming toward you. And it contains all of the other suspects." And he locked the microphone in the open position, took his shotgun and racked it. Now, you could hear this for a mile away. And they put that bird down, and then he picks up the microphone and he says, "Who wants to die first?" And back in those days, you could get away with that. You couldn't do that today.
Yeah.
And they started piling out of the bus and laying down on the grass. And then the units from the other cities showed up and started hooking them all up. And the guy who shot at me was convicted of attempted murder of a police officer because he admitted that he believed at the time that I was a cop. Probably because I was a lot thinner and had a mustache and a full head of black hair. In any event, every 2 years, I get a letter from the president of the parole board. Yeah. And you know the rest of the story. So,
Wow.
in any event, I was really curious about that because that really left an impression on me. And to this day, I can replay parts of that tape. My daughters were teenagers at that time, so it may have been a little bit different because I could actually see them aging through the video because it was so fast.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Great discussion there, fellas. And thank you for all of that from both of you. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I just, I'm going to be quick. I know I want to get Sarah Marie in there too with a question. So as you know, being the only person who is not a first responder on this group or a veteran in the other groups, your voices are powerful. And we, you know, civilians, we really don't know this stuff. We're not connected to it. And so it is such an honor to have you all share your stories. And Keith, you shared so much detail and just, you know, what you go through as a human being, you know, and again, like these stories just connect humans, not even just first responders. And so I really want to thank you for doing that. You know, the more stories you hear, the more you really understand why people drink just to get to sleep. Like that is so clear to me now that people will drink a lot because they just need to sleep. I mean,
Yeah.
Truly self-medicating. You know, of course people are trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out how to take care of themselves because there are consequences in being open.
Mhm.
So I want to thank you for being another voice that will make a difference, that will start these conversations. And I also want to say too, about the figure that came to you. One of the things that has just given me the chills listening to these stories, like one off the top of my head, one Navy SEAL, one Green Beret, one guy who, a highly addicted musician who came and shared his story. The stories of, I think, angels. Like there's no denying that there was something happening that turned them around. Like just I and I don't, we don't have time to go into it now, but I just want to stand with you on how incredible that is, your story on that. Yes, absolutely. Like honestly, I still feel the chills just remembering the other stories too. So again, Keith, I want to thank you so much. This was incredible.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention too is I'm sure some of you may know this lady here, this young lady, Jennifer Tracy. So I'm being brought into her organization, and she and I are collaborating on a couple of different projects together. So if you follow Redefine Your Mission, you'll be seeing some I don't know what you want to call them, co-talks and collaborative material coming from both of us. So
That's awesome. She's definitely a special person as well.
Absolutely.
That'll be great to watch. Sarah Marie.
Yeah, so I originally wasn't really going to say anything or talk or anything like that, but once we got into a lot of the faith stuff, I just kind of wanted to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring there. But I haven't shared too much, I think, with this group. But a lot of my trauma doesn't necessarily come from my nursing career. It actually comes from the 14 years that I was in a domestic violence relationship. So pretty much anything that I experienced nursing wise kind of paled in comparison to what I was going through in that relationship. And so one of the things I just wanted to say and bring up is, thank you for sharing. And I know that it's so hard for Elio to respond to those calls. And lose your brothers and sisters to those calls. It's really, really tough. And so as a survivor, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who answers and shows up to those calls. So and then kind of throwing into the faith part, that's what really ended up pulling me out of that relationship. I had a pretty strong faith before that relationship. But then once I was in that relationship and he was not religious or spiritual or anything. And so it was kind of got to do what, I don't want to say told, but in order to kind of keep the peace. And it was at the end of that relationship where, I rediscovered my faith and started going back to church and started reconnecting to that spiritual side that is so much of like who I am now as a person and who I always was. And so, between that and then some really amazing groups, like you got to have community, you got to have that connection, because that's that lifeline that helps you kind of find your way out of the darkness. So I really just kind of wanted to say thank you for sharing your story and kind of back up, what other people were sharing. So.
Amen.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah Marie. Appreciate it. There's so much I always want to say, and I tend to go last, and so much always gets said before me. I envy those, and as the rest of you have heard me say this before, I envy those that do have that faith and that spirituality that helps them get through. That's not something I've been able to find in my own journey, at least not up until this point. And I search for it and seek it and welcome it when that day comes, but not something I can currently relate to. But I do envy those that have gotten to that place, that are able to have that support in their life. I think that's really awesome. So good for you guys that are doing that. And thank you, Keith, for sharing your version of it. I appreciate that. Your story is pretty incredible, my friend, and I look forward to hearing it on Audible one day.
My first book is on Audible.
I'm in. I will
All right.
go right to it as soon as we're out of here. I will wait for the other two to be uploaded. But I look forward to catching up with you offline and forming a relationship and
Absolutely.
know each other a little bit better outside of this
Absolutely.
one. I think you're a pretty cool and special person. There's a lot I can learn from you as I continue along this journey. And one thing that impresses me that while the trauma part of your journey obviously has a long history, the recovery part seems to be pretty swift. And I know that probably didn't seem like it at the time, but when you look backwards from today, 3 years is really not a lot of time to come through the backside of the journey that you've been on.
Just a drop in the bucket.
I'm super impressed with that. And I think that speaks a lot to your character, your determination, and your will. And I think a lot of us can learn from that swiftness. I don't think that's ever the journey, that part of the journey, that recovery journey is not ever complete. I think that goes on for a long time, but you've come such a long way. And it's so awesome to hear that. And I look forward to learning more about it and how that swiftness came about. But thank you for being part of our speaking engagement tonight, and about our power of our story. And everybody's got such a journey to share, and everyone is special in its own right, and yours is certainly at the top of the list. So thank you for that. And Sarah, I'll let you put in some closing thoughts as in the interest of time, unless
I said my piece. Keith, you were wonderful. And David, you're a great facilitator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I really appreciate these conversations. It's what keeps me going, for sure. So Keith, thank you again.
I've got one more comment that I'd like to
sorry,
share.
Paul. I didn't see you had a hand up.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Kind of blended into your yellow cabinet back there, actually, as I look at it now.
Yeah. We used to think we were religious because we went to choir practice.
Yeah. This kind.
Yep.
Yeah.
The best book I ever read.
Yeah.
And
that one I actually did read. That was never on Audible.
I can tell you stories about choir practice.
yeah, well, I'm sure we all can.
Yeah.
But I got to the point where I realized that if I didn't change my behavior, I was headed down the same road that my grandfather was headed down, and they found him in a gutter in Miami.
Yeah.
And they have no idea how he got from Canada to Miami. Yeah. And so what I did is I went out and I purchased an organ, and I had it delivered to my house, and I sat down and taught myself to play it. I am now on my 14th organ. And I play a theater pipe organ. And it's pretty complex, but it keeps me challenged. The other side of that coin is I play exclusively for my own entertainment, so I don't offend my friends. And so hopefully Chris will see this in a subsequent viewing of it, but I wanted to share that because he had asked a very specific question of you, which is, what was the turning point for you?
Mm-hmm.
And that turning point for me was a change of environment.
Yep.
Instead of going out to the parking lot afterwards, which is a secure facility, and having choir practice and belly aching about all the things that went on that we didn't like, and all the rest of that, I decided that I needed to get out of my uniform and go home and sit down and play my organ. And I taught myself to do that. And it took a while, and I'm still learning, by the way. But I had the privilege of going over to Hawaii which is where I grew up, and because my mother was getting close to the end. And my great-granddaughter and I sat down at her organ and played for her. And when we got through, we came into her bedroom and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I had no idea you could play the organ. It never came up in a conversation. But that and the fact that, and I think it was probably divine intervention that caused me to recognize that either I was going to straighten up or I was going to wind up in jail for a DUI. And I didn't need that. And so fortunately I was forewarned instead of having to find out the hard way. But the point of it is that that shift took place, and when it did, from that day forward, it changed everything. I don't drink. And I don't say that boastfully. I just don't. I am so high on life that I don't feel like I need anything else. And unfortunately, I've never done drugs or any of that nonsense, but here we are, and hopefully Chris will get to hear that as well.
Thank you, Paul. And again, thank you, Keith, and thank you everybody that's still sticking around. And for those of you that weren't with us live and that are watching this now, I hope you enjoy this conversation. And we look forward to having you live with us someday in the future.